a bit vague, but say he's in Washington this week. Say he's already there, that's fine.
Great. Can you hear me? I'm sure you can. Thank you all for coming. Fantastic to have you here. I just want to very quickly thank the people that made this possible. You can see them to our left and our right. Our sponsors, City University London, Cardiff and Teach First. It's really, really helpful getting their support, and we're really proud to be supporting those three companies. I also want to thank the team that put this together, Tom Williams, Hoagie, Davis Diggs, Tom Witherow, Rose Buchanan, Laura Hughes and Damien Allison. They all helped on everything from contacting you guys to the website to everything else, writing bios. Wouldn't be possible without them. And thank my panel, our panel even. We have a young journalist panel now for about an hour, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll have a panel with John Witherow, Ian Katz, you know the names, Sarah Baxter, Steve Richards. That's if they turn up, which we hope they do. That's evening for you. Just very quickly, I mean, the whole idea was to bring everyone together because we all do similar things. We have similar questions we're asking ourselves, you know. And there's lots of space for us to collaborate, hopefully. Just wants to give you all a chance to meet one another, and hopefully good things will happen. We hope you enjoy the evening. I'm going to hand it over to Vaughan Smith now, who's at the Frontline Club. We really appreciate him and Millicent Teasdale for setting up the whole thing. And finally, Arillo, who are here filming, come down all the way from York to take a video of the night. We really appreciate their support as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. I'm going to be very brief. I want to welcome you. I sincerely welcome you all here. It's really, really good to see you. So thank you for coming. The Frontline Club is set up to champion independent journalism. Well, that's a grand claim. I think we'll settle on the fact that it's here to discuss it with a drink. So let's do that. However, also, we are trying to start and been thinking hard about a young person's membership to the club. So if you are interested in such a thing and would like us to follow that up, please leave your name before the evening ends with either Celia or Doug, who are in the back and have clipboards. Thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me at the back? Right, are we on? Okay, hello, good evening. My name's Sam Coates. I am the banking editor of The Times. Thank you all for coming this evening on what, it has to be said, is a pretty busy night for journalists in this country. Lots of late-breaking and quite important stories going on today. So we'll see who turns up in a bit. I have been at The Times for 13 years. I've had a brilliant and varied career, and I look forward to answering your questions about that. I'm here particularly because I am extraordinarily passionate about getting lots of people interested in journalism, in getting into journalism, and kind of on the first rung or two of the ladder. And I kind of don't mean that in the slightly patronising way that a 34-year-old could mean it. I mean it because I'm actually slightly worried, slightly concerned that if you were 18, 19, 20, and had dabbled perhaps in student journalism at the moment at universities, I'm sure many of you had, you might just be looking at the journalistic profession and wondering, maybe, there are lots of obvious attractions, but we've had a bit of a bruising time recently in the last few years. And as you sit there wondering how you're going to pay your current student debt, whether to take on more student debt to do one of the many courses that you can do, you look at the failure rates through or the lack of success rates, people who get good jobs in the industry, and you worry about those first few years, you might just flinch and turn to KPMG or to Linklaters or to something utterly depressing. And I can tell you, I've got lots of friends who did that, and about the age of 30, they all got terribly fed up with it and had midlife crisis and went off and did something much more worthy. So I can tell you this is a sustainable career. So what I thought we would do tonight, and why I'm delighted to be chairing this panel, is because I want to give you a flavour of what is brilliant about journalism, why actually it is the best job. It is the job that my friends now, today, are jealous of. I've had some of the most amazing experiences of anybody I know. I've flown on Air Force One. I've had gun held to my head in New Orleans because I strayed accidentally into the no-go zone. I've followed prime ministers around the world. And just the kind of litany of stuff that I've been allowed to do because of my time at the Times. You know, I've collected leaked documents from St James's Park when people in Downing Street thought that they needed getting into the public domain. All of this stuff is exciting and it's different and it's quite unlike any other career. So remember that when you look at the mountain that you're kind of faced with, which is kind of getting into journalism. So I'm delighted to have an excellent panel of people tonight. And what is good about tonight's panel is that there are people who are all at different stages of being in journalism, some of whom have gone through some of this a bit more recently than others. And indeed James Ball, who works at The Guardian, who is a tutor at City as well, so can give you a little bit of insight into that world. So just to go through the names, we've got, so on my left we've got James Ball, who is a data journalist, feature writer, City tutor. Next to him we've got Joshi Hermann, feature writer for the Evening Standard. We've got Lucie Fisher. She is a world affairs journalist for the Sunday Times. And we've got Jennifer Omani, who works for Telegraph for the online news desk. So the panel. Now, I managed to get on the Times because I was one of those people lucky enough to do lots of work experience, partly while I was at university, and I managed to get on the Times training scheme. There are a few such training schemes around, but I admit I was kind of lucky in that. So where I thought we would start this evening, and then I've worked my way up the Times doing lots of different jobs, largely in politics, and then more recently in banking. It seems like the paper has a certain type of person that they like me to spend my time with. So I just thought I would just go around and ask all of the panel what they do and kind of what's good about it. So if I could start with James, what exactly is it that you do for The Guardian?
Well, I mean, I'm going to try and be the miserablest tonight in that last entry-level job I saw advertised on the National got 600 applicants, so I'm not worried about how many people want to do it. But, so, you know, I'm going to try and put you all off because you all like it enough to do it for free on student papers and to come here and listen to us drone on about it. But I'm probably going to fail because journalism is a ridiculously fun job and I love mine. I do the stats, the numbers, the maths, adding up all of the bits that really everyone hates, including me. I like writing. But it gets me into ridiculous stories and fights and scrapes and all the things that's great fun. You know, whether it's doing a sort of Thatcher retrospective or digging into the sort of massive amounts of leaked offshore cables or diplomatic documents or all of that. I do a job that's essentially where numbers and stats meet journalism, and that means I get to define what it's about, and I just pick wherever it's going to be, you know, fun.
Great. My name's Joshi. I'm 24. I write for The Standard. I'm a feature writer primarily. I occasionally write some news and other things, but generally I write features, which is, because it's a pretty small ship, The Standard, I write news features, lifestyle pieces, you know, interviews. Get to do quite a lot. It's great because feature writing allows you to kind of write more than, you know, your average reporter would be able to at our age, and meet amazing people. And being in London, we get to kind of tell London's story in an amazing way. It's great fun, and I don't know if you'll get to speak a little bit about the different things that we get to do. But yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Lucie, and I work in World Affairs at Sunday Times. And as I'm 24 as well, I haven't quite been parachuted into Syria yet. But I do get to do some really interesting things involving a lot of writing. Also backing up our top team of award-winning foreign correspondents on the field, be it in research, sorting things out for them, dealing with security, logistics for them, which is all great training if you want to go into the field yourself eventually. Yeah, I agree with Joshi when he said that, you know, feature writing often offers slightly more scope than hard news. So I've tried to sort of get my fingers in as many pies as possible in terms of writing for the Sunday Times news review section, business, home news, all sorts of areas. So that's what I do, and it's great.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, 24 as well. I was a trainee at the Telegraph until December, and then they gave me the absurdly grand title of Digital Project Editor, which in reality means a combination of editing our homepage sometimes, working with our reporters and our specialists for what they're going to be doing the next day, so the news desk have some idea of what people are going to be doing in the following 24 hours. planning for large-scale projects that we know will be coming up, Obama's inauguration, for example, and working across the desks to make sure everybody knows what they're doing. And some writing as well, as and when it's needed, and live blogging, which is something that the Telegraph is very, very interested in and does a lot of. So, for example, the Algerian hostage crisis was something, probably the most recent thing that I covered in that aspect.
It strikes me that everyone probably got in on slightly different routes into journalism. As I say, I was lucky enough to get onto the last two and onto the Times training scheme, having done a fair amount of work experience at university. My experience back in, what would it be, 1998, was that, you know, if you send enough letters off, people will pick you up, people will give you a week, and you can use that little opening to get another week. And because I lived in London, I could spend decent parts of my summer holidays and other holidays working in a range of newspapers and indeed in broadcast organisations, and I basically used each little bit of work experience to open the door to another, and that was my experience back in 1998, 1999, and then I amassed enough to be able to get on the Times training scheme, which I was so convinced that I wasn't going to get, that I went for the first round interview with a guy called George Brock, who will now be familiar to many of you who know about City University, and I went to the interview with him, and I was so convinced I wasn't going to get the job that I'd forgot, I left home without a tie, and I was going via Canary Wharf, and I just thought, well, I'll just buy one on the way. And I went to the tie shop in one of the sort of suit and tie shops in Canary Wharf, and it was £20. I looked at that and I thought, what is the point in buying a tie for a job that I'm not going to get? And didn't bother. And I turned up, and I was, I think, the only candidate that they'd ever had who hadn't bothered to wear a tie. And it was the one thing that made me stand out. And so I was put through to the final round. So that was my slightly kooky experience. I wouldn't try that out necessarily, but there is no set way in. I suppose that's a long way of saying that. So that was my experience. James, how did you enter into the profession?
Yeah, I should probably have said the first thing, I'm 27, so, you know, long in the tooth compared to this fresh-faced and skilled panel. But I sort of had a very sensible career path going. I couldn't afford to work for free and intern, so I took the really glamorous first gig of working for a trade magazine in Crawley, which is Britain's loveliest town. Don't believe the rumours. And it was the grocer, and I rapidly became one of Britain's experts in the price of broccoli and all of this kind of thing. Great gig, but freelanced for the Nationals as I was doing it. Telegraph, the Times, the News of the World. Great background for a Guardian journalist, I tell you. And, you know, that was sort of going relatively well, and I sort of rose in the ranks of my little trade thing to the sneers of some of my city compatriots. And this outfit called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism was starting up, and I sort of managed to con my way into sort of joining that as a startup thing, and was starting to do quite well on that. Sort of made a panorama, made a dispatches, and all of this. And essentially, I then, for various reasons, about 2 o'clock in the morning, got a job offer from Julian Assange at WikiLeaks, at which I took some advice. I spoke to Heather Brooke, who I knew, who said, why not? It'll be funny. Always reassuring, you know, this is my life. Spoke to David Lee at The Guardian, who went, don't do it. No respectable news organisation will ever hire you again if you work for this bunch of madmen. So I went to work for them. And 4 months later, I joined The Guardian. Don't know whether that proved David Lee right or wrong, really. So I sort of tried to do it right, and then joined a sort of crazy anarchist, change the world organisation, and then ended up on the National. So you can't really plot out a career path.
Joshi?
Yeah, to be honest, my story doesn't really involve Julian Assange or Crawley, but it's banal, frankly. Sorry, can you not? Is it working? Yeah, thanks. Right, is that working, Jenny? Good. Okay, so I was at Cambridge from 2008 to 2011. I edited the Tab when I was there, pretty early on in its life. It started in Cambridge. And then in 2011 I graduated and went to the Standard to help on the letters page, which, by the way, is a pretty good gig to try and kind of get your way into a paper. And then after a few months of that, I No, actually, after a couple of months of that, I think I started on the features desk and then kind of started what I'm doing from there. On the formality at interviews point that Sam raised, I went to a Daily Mail interview. I think a lot of you will probably apply to the Daily Mail's reported scheme, their graduate scheme, and do. It's apparently great. But I went to an interview and I turned up in what I thought was a relatively smart outfit. I was wearing, some kind of chinos and I was wearing a jacket and a tie. And they said, one of the first questions was, "Are you really a Daily Mail reader?" And I said, "I read the Daily Mail, And they said, "But are you really a Daily Mail reader, do you think?" And I was like, "Well, shoot me, probably not." And they said, "Because you're the only person today who hasn't been wearing a suit." So do bear that in mind when you're doing these things, that they expect a certain amount of formality that maybe you wouldn't be used to at whatever you're doing now. But after that, I've been at the Standard now nearly for 2 years. I think it'll be 2 years in July, and I think it's going relatively well. But that's my route in. I didn't go to City. I don't know if are we going to speak about that kind of thing. We'll speak about that. I don't want to kind of slag off the sponsors, but I didn't go to City, and I will talk about that later.
Lucie.
Great. Well, I didn't go to City either. When I was at Oxford, where I read classics, I did some writing. I wasn't on the sort of executive, if you will, of any student paper, which I kind of wish I had been now, so you guys are all sort of ahead of me in that. But one thing I did do at university, which has since proved really useful, is I got, really thoroughly involved in some groups that have become really good contacts for me. So at Oxford, there's something called the Ethics, Law and Armed Conflict faculty. There's another program called the Changing Character of War. And wherever you guys are, there'll be different things if you look around. And that kind of thing, I think, has kind of given me an edge in terms of global affairs, if there's anyone here interested in foreign news. So when I left, I took to interning, spent a lot of time sleeping on friends' couches, and jumped at every opportunity. So as well as doing a lot of national newspapers, I spent a couple of weeks at the Methodist Recorder, which was enlightening. So I think just don't turn any opportunity down. And eventually I got an internship at Sunday Times, and I just refused to leave. And once I'd been around long enough, they got used to me, they liked me. I sort of demanded a little bit of money here and there, a few, sort of bungs for articles I was now writing. Not bungs, definitely not bungs. And eventually they sort of gave me a full-time job, and I've just sort of taken it from there.
Is this microphone working?
The refusing to leave tip is not a bad one. I worked at LBC Radio for a while, and they said, 1 week they said, "Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. That's the end of that." And I went, No, I'll come back next week. And they went, no, that's the end of that. And I came back next week, and then I stayed another 2 years. So, sort of part-time. So that does work. It's a bit brutal, and you feel a bit embarrassed with yourself for doing it, but it really works.
I was a columnist and edited the comment section at News, the world's greatest student newspaper, at the University of York. And once I graduated, I wasn't sure necessarily that I wanted to be a journalist. I knew I wanted to write, but I didn't know if I wanted to do it for a newspaper. So I got a job in France that paid quite well, and I had to work 12 hours a week, and I learned French. And I started blogging about French politics for a site back home, a politics website. From there, I got an internship which was funded by the EU in Malta, bizarrely. I made a kind of pact with myself not to work for free for a long time. And that was an easy pact to make because I had no money, and my parents don't live in London. So I just did internships that paid. And the first one was this one in Malta, from which I sold a story to The Guardian about censorship laws. That was my first piece in a national paper. Then I got a job in the US, an internship at The Nation magazine, which is a very old and quite austere left-of-centre magazine, which is great. I was a fact-checker there, which we don't really have in the UK. There's not really a comparable industry of, eager interns double checking whether quotes are correct and people's names and every single tiny fact of something. But it was great activity in learning how to essentially be your own sub, which you, especially the kind of people sitting in front of me, will have to do more and more. There's not always going to be someone double checking everything you do, and you're going to get the blame if it goes wrong. So that was great. I was in New York for 4 months. Then I freelanced, did a couple of things for The Guardian in that time and for The Nation from my parents' house, essentially. And then I got the Telegraph traineeship, which was in February 2011. And that started in September. So I had a kind of a while to think about things. So I'd never actually set foot in a national newspaper newsroom before I started that job. I think I haven't met many people for whom that's the case, but it is possible. So I freelanced and I interned but was paid, I guess. That's my route.
Thank you very much. Right, in a moment we're going to open up to questions. Feel free to lob anything you want at us. Postgrad courses, good or bad. Student newspapers, good or good. Anything at all. So just thinking of questions. But before we do that, I just thought we would go around and ask if people have any tips for work experience and sort of entry routes into newspapers. I've got one good tip and one tip of not what to do. The kind of thing that I say by way of being helpful is don't worry about what you can't do. I joined the Times and I was very lucky to be a trainee, and I had absolutely no clue what I was doing when I arrived. I didn't know what way up when it came to news stories. I mean, I'd written news stories for the student newspaper, but they clearly didn't look like the sorts of things that go in a national newspaper. I didn't know what sentence to put in front of another. I didn't know who to call, and I didn't know how to put it all together. It all takes time. I think that particularly with national newspaper journalism, there's an awful lot of actually unnecessary performance anxiety amongst people who are just starting out. Don't worry about what you can't do. It'll come over time. And just by plunging yourself in and actually being determined is more important than getting it right early on, because actually, that's the thing that once you're through the door, stay through the door. And here's an example of what not to do, and I hope for heaven's sake he's not here, so I can't remember his name, but we had a work experience person in the business section of the Times quite recently, and it was all fine, and he sort of did everything perfectly fine and didn't make an enormous impression, except halfway through the week where he rather meekly came over and said, I don't quite understand how to use the printers. So I was like, that's fine, I'll, let me help you. And so he said, oh, okay. So I was thinking he was on some project. And then I found myself printing out his holiday tickets, his flight tickets, and his car booking. And that's just kind of the thing that really annoys people. So if you want to end with a kind of good impression, help and be interested. Don't get people to facilitate your holidays. So that would be my tip. Going around, James?
So I guess I've got a sensible one and a general one. And the sensible one is think about what you might have as a skill that people in newsrooms don't. It's, you'll pick up a huge amount about reporting, about interviewing, about all sorts from a student paper, but as a recent grad, you're not going to have the same edge as people who've done it for 10 years or for 5 years. And so when you're trying to present a CV to a newsroom, what do you have that people might not? Do you know something about data, or are you really good digitally or online? Do you maybe know a bit of coding? Anything that says you've got a skill that isn't currently in newsrooms, and there's loads, and you can find something that suits you. That's an edge. That's something new. That's a reason to build you up and train you. The second thing is just meet people. Your sources, your ideas, your contacts, the people who might hire you, they're all out there. Anything you can do to meet people, to talk to strangers, all of that, do it, always. It's like, just get out there and have some fun while you do it. But never just think, especially if you're on a journalism course, it's all about the essays, it's all about this. Meet a ton of people and talk to them like a human, not like a sort of automate and trying to work out how they can help you. But yes.
Yeah, sorry, can we just get that microphone? Jenny. I suppose I think I agree with with James about bringing a skilled, even if you're kind of bluffing a little bit. I think if any of you have read Piers Morgan's book, it's all about like pretending you know a lot more than you do in any given situation to get ahead. I agree with that. I also think like just not being embarrassed about doing stuff is really important. So like, the people who can just go out and speak to people in the street about anything and have like 10 people rebuff them and ask a further 5 because they want the right quotes, those are the people who maybe will have an edge when they're sent out by a newsroom. Never be embarrassed about stuff. And I think also think a lot about actual reporting where you are. So at the moment at university, and I think there's a slight danger with student newspapers sometimes that I'm sure none of you guys, it's a sin none of you commit ever. But it's this thing of like kind of commenting on national events from whatever your perspective is. And often, you've got a great perspective on things, but a lot of the time when you take your cuts, often in an interview for a newspaper, they'll say, can we see your portfolio or your book? And you'll just have like a few things you wrote. And it's important to like build that up. And when they want to see that, they often want to see what things have you discovered or found out or reported, in your university, because that shows that you could transfer that skill of going up to people and finding out stories and speaking to contacts for them. And if what you only have is, features or comment pieces about the Middle East or whatever, that might have less appeal for them because they've got people who are really good at that. Not that many people go into newspapers straight away and are comment writers or leader writers or, opinion specialists. So, I think you need to think about reporting, and I think you need to think about never being embarrassed about, going out and speaking to people when they don't want to speak to you.
You've got to be fairly phlegmatic about being a journalist. I began my traineeship in 2000, and nearly in the start of 2004, I was ordered by the news desk to spend an entire weekend photocopying something like 15,000 pages for other more senior correspondents. So don't get grand after a week's work experience. I found myself being totally humiliated 3 years down the line. But you just sort of got to swallow it and suck it up, because the real rewards are there a little bit later on. So that would be...
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing, sorry. Something that was observed about an intern in our office recently, again, hope they're not here, is this girl came in and she was sitting at the desk. I think she was being relatively helpful, but she had a flask on her desk. And I didn't notice that. I was just like, yeah, she's got a flask. And one of my colleagues, who's a big shot at the Telegraph and is now at the Standard and does big things, was like, why's that girl got a flask? And I was like, I don't know, she just wants to have tea all day that's relatively warm. And he was like, never bring a flask when you're in work experience, because it means, first of all, you never get to make tea, which on the one hand is a little bit humiliating, but on the other hand, like, the benefit of it is that you meet everyone. The whole thing about work experience is that you just want to casually bump into people without forcing yourselves on them. You want to constantly just be talking to people, I'll get you tea, I'll get you this, can I do this for you, can I do that for you? And this girl was just sitting at her desk all day with the flask, and obviously no one was, speaking to her as a result, because she wasn't going around doing tasks for people. So I'd say that's my top line on top of everything.
I would certainly second Sam in saying that attitude is just so important, because if, like me, you don't have some... Oh, sorry. I was saying attitude is important, because if, like me, you don't have a special skill and you can't speak 6 languages, what does stand out is the fact that you're willing to do anything, you're willing to go the extra mile, you're willing to stay till 10 p.m, midnight, not make a fuss, offer to make tea, offer to do photocopying. And the fact of the matter is, look, everyone in this room is at a fantastic university. You're all going to come out with top degrees, so don't think, you walk in there with a first class that's going to make the difference. It isn't. And on top of that, I would also say, networking is really, really important. One thing I did, which I would recommend to anyone, is do some freelance diary work. And we have a diarist in the audience here, Jessica Lambert at the Standard, who is another rising star and should really be on the couch. But that's just a great chance to meet lots of people, in the literati world, celebs, politicians, people whose numbers you can get if you really try and charm them, schmooze them. So that's a tip I'd give to anyone, because those diary columns are quite easy to get, the odd break of some event that maybe not the top people will be sent off to.
I would say one thing I thought a lot of people would do but didn't do when I had my interview for the Telegraph is to know the product really well. If you want to work somewhere, you need to prove to the people that you're speaking to that you know the kind of journalism they actually do. I think that's just really, really key. What makes a Times story different to a Telegraph story? What makes a Mail story? I mean, the Mail and the Guardian is the most obvious one, but you know there are kind of nuances in national newspapers that can go unnoticed unless you're reading them every single day. And if you want to work at one of these places, it's not good enough to read them in the week before your interview. You need to be reading them now, and you need to read them in detail. Read the letters page, like read the court circular, read the whole thing, and you'll get a really good idea of what the product is. To return to unfortunate examples that everybody's given, we had an interviewee who said that they were really looking forward to working with Isabel Oakeshott. Well, that's great. Go and work at the Sunday Times because she doesn't work at the Daily Telegraph. That kind of thing is just really inexcusable. I mean, you just can't. You need to know the bylines, you need to know the people, you need to know the names of the editors, and you need to know why they're in the position they're in. The other thing I would also say is just read as widely as possible, and that means international media. I mean, we often pick up quite obscure, say, foreign stories from local press in lots and lots of different places. And if you have a particular language skill, if you can read Le Monde, if you can read Der Spiegel, do so, because often there will be things that you'd be surprised never get translated and never get reported in the British press that are actually quite interesting stories. So if you can do that, go for it. Like, that's all I'd say.
Cool. Thank you very much indeed. So over to questions. Who wants to begin?
I was going to ask, especially with... Oh yeah, that's exciting. I was going to ask, in the days that we now have kind of rolling media where the news cycle gets shorter and shorter as technology moves faster and faster, how far do you think that kind of the journalist has the edge in terms of kind of things like embargoes and off the record compared to, say, the blogger, who actually can kind of actually report on stuff without having to react to their editors or their bosses?
Jennifer, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I can do. I don't know what to sound completely controversial. There are certain blogs that I would consider to be sort of power blogs. If you look at someone like Guido, or no, he's really the only one I think that we would take really, really seriously, and that people working in our lobby would always look at and keep abreast of. I think maybe the power of the blogger in recent years, say in the last maybe 5 years ago, was a bit overstated. Like in the end, I will say this as a representative of a national newspaper, but I do think that when somebody from the Cabinet Office wants to leak something, often they will call someone from a national newspaper and they won't necessarily ask to speak to somebody who runs quite an obscure blog. I think where blogs come into their own is people who who have the time and the expertise to do something that's a bit different. So, for example, there was a guy who was sorting through the kind of munitions that were being used in Syria. I've forgotten his name. I don't know if this was actually reported in the Sunday Times. I can't remember.
There's several, yeah.
Yeah, and he was just spending every single day collecting data about this through social media and through pictures, crowdsourcing information. That is the kind of thing that very few people in national news would have time to do, and that is completely invaluable. That kind of person supplements our reporting to a T. I think, so for really kind of large-scale projects, bloggers can have the edge. I wonder if they do less so for the kind of traditional political scoop, perhaps.
I just wonder whether or not we've seen a really good example of the answer to your question in the last 48 hours with the Boston bombing and massacre, because there, rather than blogs but Twitter, what you had on Twitter in the 3, 4, 5, 6 hours immediately after that were lots of people saying lots of different things. There are 10 bombs. Some of the other ones have gone off. There are 20 people dead. And suddenly we realised that what you really needed was a trusted news provider to sort through what's true and what's just speculation and what's just plain wrong. And I think that leaving the form aside, the platform aside, there will always be a role for the people that are trusted to provide news content from objective, independent and authoritative source. And I don't know what newspapers are going to look like in the future, but there's always got to be somebody who guides that. And I think that bloggers have advantages and don't have editors, but actually having editors is a good thing because it means that there are standards and rigour and all of that, and people turn to specific sources for a reason, and I think that's a good thing.
I think I would have made some very, very unfortunate, serious, embarrassing mistakes if I hadn't had an editor, especially at the age I am and at the point in my career I was at. I think I would definitely say that.
Let's get more questions. If we all answer every one, we'll hardly get any.
Cool. Just everyone who wants to ask a question, put your hand up. Okay. And take them in twos because there are quite a few. So 1 and 2 to start with.
Okay, you've spoken quite a lot about print journalism, but do any of you have any experience in the world of broadcast journalism? Sort of radio and television as well as online video footage, that kind of thing. And how do you say that differs?
I know it's a trite question, but it does seem more pertinent than ever. Is there any point in us carrying on printing student papers, or should we just all go online?
Student papers or all papers?
All papers, I suppose.
Oh.
Can I jump in on broadcast?
Yes.
So I worked in broadcast for the best part of a year, and it's
Yeah.
it's of course. So I don't think these little mics work. Sorry, I tend to shout, so I'm assuming you could have heard me anyway. I worked in broadcast for the best part of a year, and essentially, unless you work, especially if you're thinking about current affairs, dispatches, panorama, all these kind of things, it's great fun, but you will have even less of a life than if you work in print, irregular hours, and absolutely zero job security whatsoever. The thing you learn with any kind of journalism is everyone knows everyone, and you can never quite be sure how they know them. And in TV, it's all like that, but more so because no one stays at one company for very long, and everyone jumps around film to film. It's quite an unglamorous beginning television. It's all about getting the right people there at the right time and sorting out lots of incredibly mundane details. TV is really, really laborious and time-consuming. The end product is amazing. Like when you see a finished package half-an-hour TV of television, and you know what went into it, you have a real sense of pride. But you will also have spent the sort of 10 days before that spending at least 16 hours in a very small and badly ventilated edit suite with people who haven't been washing much. I mean, I think everything's moving together. I don't think that means everyone has to learn how to do everything, but TV won't be that separate from print in 20 years' time. But it's still there, it's still good, just the first few years are pretty dreary. The hours are awful. They're really, really, really horrible. But overall, especially if you get through it, the money is actually better.
Just a slightly more optimistic note.
That was optimistic.
Gosh, I'd hate to hear your pessimism. I'd say, let me give you an example. The 2010 election, I covered that as a newspaper reporter. I was chief political correspondent for the Times then. That was blatantly a TV election. Almost everything that happened had something to do with telly. The TV debates, the incident in Rochdale where Gordon Brown accused an old lady of being a racist, the cycle of the day was kind of very much drawn together for telly. And it was the first time that I really sat in a newspaper newsroom and thought, crikey, I'm slightly in the wrong medium here. So I think I think it's really interesting the way that news events are adapting to different forms. And there are people who do absolutely brilliant TV broadcasting. I mean, I think my favourite example, the person who I think everyone should watch and should learn from, was Laura Koonsberg during the when she was chief political correspondent for the BBC News Channel. Absolutely phenomenal. She managed to achieve the kind of gold standard of broadcast journalism, which is present things clearly and articulately, and break stories, advance the news agenda, tell people stuff that other people didn't know, find out stuff that other journalists didn't know. And because of her profile, she was able to put together a level of access, an immediacy, and using her Twitter feed, a wide ability to disseminate stuff in a very immediate fashion to large numbers of people extremely well. There are these people that are really turning rolling news around and making it their own, and that's extremely exciting, and that's an evolution. And and in 5 years' time, hopefully there'll be more people like her. Whether or not we even exist, Joshi and Lucie.
Just very briefly, I've never worked in broadcast, but on behalf of my boss, I should say Evening Standard TV is coming and it's going to be big. So roll up. But what I would say about the question about whether student newspapers should be online, I actually never worked. I mean, I wrote some stories for Varsity, but then I moved to the Tab, and I can't speak for the Tab nationally, but what I can say is it was a brilliant way to present what we were doing. Our website was, I think we took as much pride in our website and how everything was presented and how everything came across and the comments and everything as the Varsity team did in their print edition. And I think there's a huge future for student journalism that's done like that, and it allows people to, because you don't need to be in an office necessarily. You can write quick stories and blog posts from all over the campus and that kind of thing. I think, especially because of the comment side, and because you're living in your universities are little bubbles where people kind of know each other, and therefore the comment sections, in a way, I thought worked better when I was at the Tab and we in the Cambridge setting, in the university setting, than they do in a lot of nationals, where you have a lot of kind of conspiracy theorists and haters and misogynists all like piling in about different things, like irrelevant stuff normally. But whereas, when you've got an online student newspaper, a lot of people know each other and you've got, similar frames of reference, and I think it works really well. And I think I'm really impressed when I sometimes click on, I follow some of your newspapers on Twitter, and sometimes I click on the websites, and they're really brilliant. And I think there's a huge future for doing student journalism like that. I don't know how long print will last, but we used to print, I think, one newspaper a term. When I finished, it was one newspaper a term in print, and then we'd do the rest online. And that may be a way to go in the future.
So I think there's a cynical one-sentence answer to printing student papers, and that's that print adverts sell for a lot more than online ones. And if you want to fund your student journalism, probably still worth printing for now.
Lucie, the question for you is, do you think we might get to a situation in the future where the only printed edition of a national newspaper is the one on a Sunday?
Well, I'm not quite sure about that. I think the truth of the matter is that the average age of most national newspapers is fairly old. I think most of them are over 50 now, I think I'm right in saying. And I think that generation want their news in the format they've always had it, which is in paper. I definitely think that Sunday journalism will remain in print form, and that it should, because part of the joy of buying the Sunday Times is that it's got these beautiful supplements. We're really proud of our magazine, and Sarah Baxter's coming later to talk to you about that, which is, the photography in that is world class, and it's just not the same, even if you've got, a shiny new iPad. And I think it's something that, whether we're with friends or family, everyone wants to have a bit of the paper and read it over brunch. It's much more leisurely. But I think in terms of daily journalism, there's much more need for it to be 24-hour online, whereas weekly journalism is much more investigative.
Let's get some more questions. Gentleman there and the guy next to him. Where's the mic?
My question is, as student journalists, we can pretty much write whatever angle we like as long as it's legal, or we can get away with it, whichever comes first. And obviously you work at a wide range of papers, and they all have agendas and owners and people who are interested in them. And how much do you find that affects your job, and how much should we be concerned about that?
How important do you think data will be? Do you think it will become a just fundamental basic skill for all journalists?
Agendas.
Oh yeah, sorry. No, to be honest, the Standard is I think generally regarded as conservative, supporting newspaper at the moment, but I think that wouldn't always be the case. I think it would often be down to, because the owner of our newspaper also owns The Independent, and they're not Conservative supporting at all, so I think it would kind of change by the editor. To be honest, it doesn't really affect my my job very much. I mean, I don't think I've ever had to be kind to anyone. I think more often one has to be kind to, or one has to be sensitive to people who are known to various people at the newspaper rather than a political angle. But I think you should relish the freedom you have at your student paper while you've still got it, because I'm not sure my experience would be uniformly experienced across the industry. Yeah.
I actually found some of the interests in student journalism a little more restrictive than the ones in national newspaper journalism. Advertising was far closer tallied to whether or not you were nice to an advertiser or not. One of the great things about the Times is its unpredictability. We're one of the very few papers that has backed both Labour and Tory in the last 15 years. We have some people might think that we're conservative, but we've just appointed a Blairite as our chief leader writer. We confound and surprise. Our economic policy supports growth targeting. That's not something you would naturally assume is a sort of Times policy. That kind of lack of clear identity, I think, is what makes our paper exciting, because you don't kind of know where we're going to come out on stuff. And what stories we're going to write about, and that's brilliant. And I think what all journalists, I suspect, all reporters want is the maximum latitude to go after a story from any angle. And I think that's broadly what all of us can do. And I think you pretty quickly get to know if somebody feels that their hands are tied. You know, there's Private Eye. There are other newspaper websites to leak stuff to. So I think all of that's pretty fair. Data, James.
Yeah, I thought I might end up with that one. Just firstly on the agenda, I write news features and comment. I have never, ever been told what to write at all, and I've never had a piece spiked for taking the wrong slant. I think we all are in this strange position where we think we're in a uniquely lucky position to get to do that. As it comes to data, there's sort of a long-running thing in journalism where it's quite cute to go, I don't really know numbers. It's not cute, it's grotesquely irresponsible. And if you go to journalism and you don't get your head around numbers, piss off right now. This is how you screw up your readers. This is how you really, really do the worst kind of journalism. This is how MMR happens. This is how, if you want dead kids on your conscience, write news stories when you don't know numbers. If I sound preachy, it's because I am. I'm a total hypocrite. But getting numbers wrong doesn't matter as much in journalism as anything else. You know, The Telegraph is a generally fantastic paper that occasionally puts ludicrous numbers on its front page. It once told you public sector pensions cost you £4,000 a year. They actually cost you 200. They got it wrong by a factor of 20. Not only did they never bother correcting that, they put that front page on a banner poster in the front of in W.H. Smith stores for a month. If they'd have spelt the Prime Minister's name wrong, it would have had less consequences and they'd have fixed it. So, yes, things are slightly changing. That's why you should get this stuff right. The reason it's good for you tactically is because not many people are good at data at the minute. And loads of places are hiring. The Times is hiring data journalists. We occasionally hire data journalists, and we don't hire anyone, man. You know, the Telegraph does. It's quite fun. It lets you call ministers liars. It lets you dig into sort of secret documents. It's quicker. I mean, most of data journalism is about automating the boring stuff. I don't want it to be this big specialism. I hate the idea that we have journalists whose job title is data journalist. My job title is data journalist. It should just be something everyone knows, everyone uses, and then someone tells you something down the pub, and you go and find the data and see if it's right. I think if any of you aren't trying to get into this, you're missing a massive trick. So please do.
There's a certain element of that's true for business journalism as well. It shouldn't be the case that the only people who can read a balance sheet are business journalists. And you are hobbling yourself if you don't get your head around that kind of stuff too. And it's quite depressing that there aren't more people that can. Anyway, more questions. 1, 2.
I've got the mic, so I'm asking a question anyway. Sorry. We mentioned Twitter very briefly earlier, and a lot of journalists use it. Some don't, and I wanted to ask any of the panel who have it or don't have it why they do. Basically, Twitter, yay or nay.
I think.
Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, let's get one
one
more question.
I'm going to ask Ajol, is going to do master postgraduate at university worth it? And at City, for example, you've got the print versus interactive, where if you go and learn data, you can't do shorthand. How important is doing shorthand, and would you have to do it outside if you're going to do data, for example?
Mine works, so I'm fine.
Can you shout at the back?
Apparently they don't work well.
Oh, okay. Twitter. So I think I feel about Twitter the same way that James feels about data. If you're not on it, you're really, really missing out. And it's not a coincidence that I think almost... We've got a pretty good blanket coverage now at Telegraph. The vast majority of people are now on it. And some of the least likely people who you thought would not really get it or wouldn't understand it or wouldn't actually enjoy using it, you now find the reason... I mean, I was told that the point at which everyone started getting Twitter was the point when they realised they were missing stories because of that they were behind on the news curve, and nobody likes to be shown up. That's when people started using it, and it's a great tool for finding people that you want to get into contact with, to ask them awkward questions about what they've done that day when you're trying to get a story about them. It's good for keeping up with how far ahead your competitors are in the same news process, because often journalists will just tweet, I'm in this place, I'm looking for this person. You're like, well, great, okay, we know you're there. So it's good to get an edge on your competitors, and it's also just a very, very useful tool to quantify interest in something. How many people are tweeting about this? If everybody on your feed is tweeting about something and you're following a sufficiently large amount of people, you'll know that it's worth doing a story about it. I mean, we use that as a metric every single day in conference to judge what we should be doing for the rest of the day with our stories. So I would say it's absolutely essential. And if you weren't on it, people would be pretty surprised. The shorthand thing, I'll just answer that really quickly. I think a lot of older reporters and editors see it as essential. I think if you want to impress those people, it's worth having. I didn't have it when I started. I had to learn on the job, and it was really tough. I've learned French. I'm learning Arabic. Shorthand I found in some ways more difficult than both those languages. It's just really, really tough. Once you've got it, and that's it. So if you can do it and you can find someone else to pay for it, it's worth having. I'd say.
Anyone else on Twitter?
You're going to have to let me chip in the city or I'll get sacked.
Okay. Do you want to are you going to do Twitter or do you want?
I do mine as well.
Let's go to City because we've got quite a lot of questions. You've got 60 seconds to justify £9,000 fees.
I'm not sure I'm going to justify them, actually. Firstly, I teach the interactive course at City. It's way better than shorthand, so you should definitely do that. No, City is expensive. It's £9,000. If you can get into journalism without it, do it. But if you aren't sure that you're going to be able to get into it, loads of people are now coming forward with brilliant first degrees, student newspaper experience, work experience, and something showing they spent a year meeting real journalists, doing journalism all the time, thinking about professional training, sort of really having that level of commitment. If they have that MA on their CV and you don't have it on yours, who do you think employers are going to look at? It's like an arms race. So many people want to do journalism that you've got to have that little bit extra, and it's ridiculous and it's terrible. And frankly, it's outsourcing onto you, paying the costs that newspapers used to pay training you. It's a terrible injustice, but it helps you out. I nearly bankrupted myself doing the City MA, but I wish I could say I would be sat here if I hadn't. I am. It won't make you a journalist. If you're the kind of person who wasn't going to make it before, you won't make it after. It will make you better. Shorthand, if people have it, they will be evangelical to you about how great it is, how essential it is. It isn't. It makes you really good at blandly taking down what people say. If you don't have it, you get better at listening to what they say and writing down the important bits.
At the moment, if you're in court, it's the only way you're allowed to note things down.
Yeah, that's
legally.
true. Yeah.
So if you get sent to court, you have to have it. Otherwise, you'll...
I actually have it, by the way.
But I think it's also worth adding that the three of us didn't go to City, and I think a lot of people I see around me getting into journalism today are those with real determination, rat-like cunning, claw your way in. And I'm glad I didn't have £9,000 to spare. I used my kind of friends' charity currency on having me sleeping on their couches while I interned. And I think that philosophically, I think that journalism is a trade and should remain a trade. I kind of don't think it should become a professional, should be professionalised, but that's my opinion.
I'm obligated to point out that other courses are available, particularly Cardiff, that may or may not be a sponsor. Oh, yes, they are. Brilliant. More questions? Lady over there, and then lady over there.
I'm not sure if the other girl has a microphone yet. I'll hand it to her. We were talking earlier about internet coverage and websites and things, and I was wondering, seeing as quite a lot of articles, and especially like with all like student newspapers, I think, are online, what's to motivate readers to actually pick up the newspapers and pay for them now, especially like younger readership who like may not like be able to, especially students who may not be able to afford to pick up the newspapers and will just go to the websites instead.
Kind of leading on from that, one of the big success stories of recent years has been the Eye, which is only 20p and therefore a fraction of the price of most national newspapers. Do you think that's the future of journalism being paid at that price? And also, what do you think the relationship is between magazines and newspaper journalism, and how's that going to change?
Who wants to go? The first two linked questions there.
Got to let Joshi go in the Eye, surely.
Another message on behalf of the bosses. I think the Eye is great. It's grown hugely. I think it's the only print newspaper on the market that's growing. But 20p is cheap, and I don't think they'd be able to run the Independent purely making newspapers that cost 20p, you know? Because newsagents generally require a little bit of money as an incentive to sell newspapers. So I think it's a fantastic project. I hope it becomes an enormous deal. It looks like it is becoming so. But I don't think selling print copies of any newspaper at 20p in the long run is going to be the solution. I think I've done the opposite of what I intended here. But obviously it's a really promising deal. Just a very quick thing about the question from the back about why people would bother to pick up print. Generally, I think you're right that young people aren't picking up print like the older people are. But sometimes, I think this week was a good example of when you could look at newspapers and think, what an advantage you can have by having a nice spread open to you with big pictures. If you look at our special Maggie edition today, beautiful pictures in that. A lot of the pictures after the day after Margaret Thatcher died had, you know, brilliant supplements and that kind of thing. That kind of thing at the moment can't be replicated online, and that it's a very strong argument for keeping a print element in most media companies, is that you can deliver a product that looks different and that is just hugely impressive visually, which at the moment isn't really something that online can match, I think.
I'd bet money most of this room wasn't born when Maggie resigned, so it might not be the...
Sorry, not resigned, did I say resigned?
Just on a curiosity of the Eye, the Eye basically gives you a cut-down version of what's in the Independent. You basically pay 20p for the Eye, but you pay another 80p, so a pound I think it is for the Independent. So that's 80p for the bits of the Independent that you didn't really need, because everything you did need went into the Eye. So in some ways, it's quite strange economics. It is very depressing when you look around your peer groups at people who are interested in current affairs who are not buying newspapers, and in particular print editions. But I think we would be fools to say for certain what's going to happen. I certainly think that there is a lot of mileage in tablet editions of newspapers. There's a big philosophical debate at the moment in newspapers about whether or not people want to pick up something on a tablet that's refreshed once a day. So when you look at the Times, do you look at that morning's paper? Or whether when you pick up the tablet edition of a paper, you want to see the latest, for instance, the way that the Financial Times does it. These are the kind of big questions that newspapers and their associated websites have to grapple with over the years to come. And I don't know the answer to that, the print question, the tablet question. I just know that I've committed myself to an industry that I'm very passionate about, and I'm slightly outsourcing the job of making sure it continues to other people. Right, should we do more questions? Probably the last round. So one from there and one from there.
I was just wondering, how important is a specialism? Because I've heard one person say you should change every 5 years, and someone else say you should have one set specialism. If you don't, then give up, basically.
This is kind of followed up from one over there. Firstly, just from the one before, do you think we'll see most online content disappearing behind a paywall, like at the Times? And then secondly, how hard do you find it to kind of toe the editorial line? Do you ever find it conflicts with your own personal stuff?
Lucie, I suppose you're the closest on the panel this evening to being a specialist with your World Affairs hat on. How important is it?
Well, I can't really say I'm a specialist in world affairs because it is, of course, the world. But it's certainly. I mean, in a sense, you know, if you get into foreign journalism, then you're looking at something that's even broader than just being in domestic news. And even within that, I've just tried to make myself a sort of vague specialist in some areas where we don't have full-time correspondence. So a good example is North Africa, the Maghreb. So when something like the Algeria hostage situation arose, people came to me, they said, oh, who are all these terrorist groups, Majao and AKIM? And I said, let me tell you. And they said, you know, great, that's when, you know, it's your moment to shine because you know a lot about it, you can shed light, you know where to look to find angles. You know, I found a terrorist who was a maths graduate who'd started AKIM in Algeria in the 90s through having read about this a lot and being in contact with the right people. But above that, I think you definitely got to spread yourself as widely as possible in terms of being able to know blanket knowledge about enough things.
Jennifer, do you want to do what feels to some like an inexorable march towards paywalls?
Okay. We have gone into a metered system, which is very similar to the New York Times, where you get 20 articles free a month, and then you have to start paying. Before I started working at a national newspaper, I was very much, you know, I came up through the blogging world, and a lot of the time that's people who are really committed to open source, to having everything free. I no longer believe that. I don't see why my colleagues in Syria risking their lives every day should do so free. I don't see why my colleagues who are spending hours and hours and hours of their lives, maybe not seeing their families, to produce the really amazing news content that we have for free. I think people should pay for quality, and people always have paid for quality, and I hope that they always will when it comes to our industry. At the moment, I think we're in a... I'm no longer as pessimistic as I was even 2 years ago about this phenomenon of the death of journalism. I actually wonder if this is just a quite scary transitional phase where what we get at the end of it is going to be very different from what we had before, but maybe it will trim some of the fat. Maybe that was a necessary process that we had to go through. That's only my own opinion. But
James, I know you want a quick word on his free best, but the question I really want to ask you is the final one. Nobody would ever say that their hands were tied on any specific article, but to what extent are the topics that you choose and the way that you go about investigating them and writing them a reflection, in part a reflection of the sort of organisation that you work for? I mean, isn't there a relationship, a complex relationship, between the paper, its audience and its expectations, and the output that comes out of the journalists?
I mean, this kind of problem is where the view from nowhere sort of theory of journalism falls apart. This idea, much more practiced in the US than here, but we occasionally pay lip service to it, that we are impartial purveyors of truth, and while our comment pages have comment in, the news is unbiased, is impartial. Certainly each story tries to be, but what is a big deal for The Guardian is not necessarily a big deal for the Mail and vice versa. And so when you work in news, you want your story to get lots of space, you want it to be a big deal, you want it to play well. Now on the internet you get a bit of freedom about that. Just because something isn't prominently featured doesn't mean it won't do well, but you are serving a particular readership. There's probably a reason you joined a particular paper. And so I know some stories might get on page 1 and others might be down page on 17, and maybe that affects which stories you choose. It's much more subtle an idea, though, than anyone ever telling you what to write. And that's actually, when you work in the industry, it's what you tend to find. And the paywall debate is a lot more subtle than it works. It's pitched as this big ideological battle and this big break from the past. No one has ever paid the cover price of quality journalism. It's an utter myth. It's always, always, always been sponsored and subsidised by advertisers and by proprietors. It's true now, the mix is just a bit different. And whether paywalls are a good part of your revenue or not isn't actually an ideological thing. It's about who reads you and where you come from. Paywalls, the ones that work, convert the subscriber base and add, I can tell you, data, about 1.5% of your circulation to your subspace. If you've got loads of subscribers, that's got to work for you. That's got to be worth the traffic loss. The Guardian, tiny newspaper, 200,000 a day, massive website, 78 million a month. For us, maybe the logic isn't there. Maybe it is. But it's not this big divide. It's not this big battle. It's not this big severance from the past. It's just trying to work out how to get some money to fund something we love making, and that actually more people are reading journalism now than ever before by a huge number. And that's the thing to sort of remember among all of this. We're not diminishing, we're growing. We just have to work out how not to run out of money as we do it.
Thank you very much indeed. That's optimistic note on which to finish it all. I'd like to thank our panel, Jennifer, Lucie, Joshi, James. As one of the only 30-somethings in the room, I'd like to say I'm very much looking forward to working for you in the years to come. Thank you for listening, and I hope to join you for a drink.
We'll be back at 9:15 for the second panel. Thanks, everyone.